So now in this module, we learned a lot of important new concepts and we learned about new React hooks. Specifically, we can see it here in the login component. We knew about useState before, but now we also learned about useEffect, useReducer, and also useContext. So there are a bunch of React hooks. There are even more hooks than that, but we'll get there step by step. Now that we have all those hooks, it is important that we also learn about some rules for using them. We always followed those rules thus far, because of course I'm not teaching you incorrect patterns, but I think it's now also time to give you a formal definition which you can print out, put on your wall, and make sure you don't violate them. You find this slide attached therefore. Side note, all slides are always attached to the last lecture of each module. Anyways, there are two main rules you have to know when it comes to working with React hooks. And React hooks are simply all those functions that start with use. So useEffect, useReducer, and so on. The first rule, which is important, is that you must only call React hooks in React functions. That means in React component functions, as we did it thus far, or also allowed in custom hooks. That's not something we explored yet, but of course that will also be included in this course. Just as the name suggests, it's a bit more complex and therefore a bit more advanced, and something we'll therefore dive in later. These are the two scenarios where you are allowed to use React hooks. And what does this mean? Well, to give you a concrete example, here in the login component, we for example have the email reducer function. This is a function next to the login function. The login function here, however, is my component function for the login component, and it identifies itself as such a function because it returns JSX in the end. That is what makes up a component function. Email reducer does not do that. It returns an object. It's not a React component, and therefore calling useState in here is not allowed. And the good thing is, a modern React setup with a good IDE like Visual Studio Code will even tell you about that. You see it down there. React hook useState is called in function email reducer, which is neither a React function component or a custom React hook function. So exactly what I stated on the slide. You're only allowed to use hooks in React function components or in custom hooks. Email reducer is neither of that, and hence we get an error. So you should get an error if you try to do that, should get a warning, and here is also your technical rule: don't do it. The second important rule is that you must only call React hooks at the top level of your React component functions or your custom hook functions. Don't call hooks in nested functions, don't call them in any block statements. So again, to give you an example, here in the login component, so now inside of the functional component, we of course, for example, have our useEffect function here. So the function which we pass to useEffect. You're not allowed to call useContext or useState or any other hook in there. Again, you will see I get a warning here. React hook useContext cannot be called inside a callback. React hooks must be called in a React function component or a custom React hook function, and it needs to be called directly on the top level there. So calling it here is okay, because that's the top level of this login function, but in a nested function is not allowed. And that's not just true for nested functions, it would also not be allowed in an if statement. Calling useState in there, also not allowed. So again, a very simple rule, not too hard to follow. Only call React hooks at the top level. Now these are the two official rules of hooks. There is a third rule which I want to add here, not directly related to all hooks, but to one specific hook. And that's the useEffect hook. There, make sure that you always add everything you refer to inside of useEffect as a dependency, unless there is a good reason not to do that, I should add. And to make it clear what I mean, let's again go to login component. In here, we use useEffect to execute this function, and in there, we use nothing from the surrounding component. We use console log, but that's baked into the browser. I'm not talking about browser API things. I'm talking about data exposed by the surrounding function. And here we're not using any data, hence we have no dependencies. It's a different thing for this use effect here though. There we have this function, and in there we're using setTimeout, which is a browser API. You don't need to add those. But we are using email is valid and password is valid. And that's data from the surrounding component. That's part of the surrounding component's state. And if it would be part of the surrounding component's props, the same would be true. So what I'm now saying would be true in that case as well. Such dependencies or such values need to be added as dependencies. Technically, we should therefore also add setForm is valid, because that's not a browser API. But this is one exception to that rule actually. The state updating functions exposed by useReducer or by useState are guaranteed by React to never change, and therefore you don't need to add them as dependencies, because if they never change, well, it's a redundant dependency. You could add it though. Wouldn't be wrong, wouldn't be horrible. You could add it and it would work in the same way. You are just allowed to omit it. And actually, you don't need to memorize all of that if you think, well, that's too much. No worries. If I remove a dependency here, in a modern setup, you should get a warning here that React hook useEffect has a missing dependency. Either include it or remove the dependency array. So, you are warned here as well, and I just want to explain this warning and why you are getting it. There are some exceptions, like the state updating functions, but all the other data, which is not coming from the browser or from outside your component function, so all the data that is from inside your component function in which you are using useEffect needs to go into the dependency array. That's my third rule here. And with that, you are well prepared to use hooks and to build amazing apps. Now let's continue on that road.